We are very excited to have a guest, a return guest to Canzano and Wilner, the podcast, videocast, whatever we want to call this. Rick Neuheisel is going to be joining us, longtime coach, coached at multiple places, now has his own show, and he's become kind of this voice in college football that we want to check in with. I'm Jon Canzano. You can read my work at joncanzano.com. He's Jon Wilner. You can find him at wilnerhotline.com. Why do we want to have Rick Neuheisel back on the show, Wilner?
Every time I talk to Rick, I learn something and I get entertained. So those are two reasons, right? I mean, he's coached at Colorado, coached at UCLA, coached at Washington. And now, he's the voice. In many ways, he's the lead voice for CBS Sports coverage of college football. And I think that's important, not only because he's so involved in it, but he doesn't work for ESPN or Fox. And so it's a different perspective on the whole thing. CBS is a big part of college football, but it is not one of the two dominant players. And I think that lends a level of credibility to what Rick has to say and his perspective on all the conferences and the CFP.
Yeah, and I think, look, we're watching coaches try to navigate this season, and it's a season where depth matters more than just about any other time. I talked to Neuheisel at Big Ten Media Day, and, he picked Oregon to beat Ohio State in that game that went down at Autzen Stadium. I want to know what he thought about that, what he might see in a rematch, and kind of as a coach, what he makes of all the belly aching about officiating and sort of the navigation of this season is going to be very different than seasons in prior history.
Yep. And certainly his view on the West Coast schools in particular, perhaps his alma mater, UCLA, maybe its rival, USC. We may have to ask him about Lincoln Riley's job security.
Hey, before we get to Neuheisel, you and I are both at the Holy War, and we watched, a huge After Dark BYU, Utah, Holy War After Dark episode that went down on Saturday night, 8:15 Mountain Time kickoff. A lot of drama in the aftermath where the Utah AD, Mark Harlan, crashes the news conference in the postgame and just blisters the Big 12 officiating. He gets fined after that. He gets reprimanded. He didn't really offer an apology, more of a, hey, there was a time and place. I should have exercised myself in that way sort of statement afterwards. But I loved that Harlan spoke his mind. And I also kind of think he ingratiates himself to his head coach and to his fan base. And I kind of wonder in this NIL era if we're going to see more ADs be outspoken about things that matter to fans who are giving to the collective and sort of take a I'm on your side approach.
This game was absolutely stolen from us. We were excited about being in Big 12, but tonight I am not. We won this game. Someone else stole it from us. Very disappointed. I will talk to the commissioner. This was not fair to our team. I'm disgusted by the professionalism of the officiating crew tonight. Thank you.
His comments were next. First of all, I understood the frustration, right? Rivalry game. Their season hasn't gone great, Utah's. And boy, there was two controversial situations on that BYU's winning drive. What I found interesting about Harlan's comments were he didn't just criticize the calls. He questioned the professionalism of the officials, and he even went next level by saying he wasn't sure, he wasn't happy being in the Big 12 at that moment. We've enjoyed our time in the Big 12, but not right now. And right. That was something that, I was, holy cow. So yeah. I think that's part of the reason why his fine was also next level, right? In the past, the Big 12 has set precedent with $25,000 fines for coaches and ADs who criticize the officials. Harlan's was $40,000 because of where he went in, uncharted waters with his criticism.
Look, I think I get why he did it. I think he's aligning himself with his constituents and saying, hey, Kyle Whittingham, I've got your back. It reminds me, Bob DeCarolis, the Oregon State AD, did this years ago. He did the same thing where he came out and he blistered the Pac-10 at the time. Remember, Tom Hansen came out and had a reprimand of him, and DeCarolis had this big issue with how the game was officiated, but he didn't at any time say, hey, we're not happy in the Pac-10. And so I kind of saw that as a shot across the bow of the Big 12. Like, hey, look, are you protecting BYU, your undefeated entity, with these calls? Because you and I were both there. Like, look, I don't think the quarterback for BYU gets the pass off, whether there's holding there or not. But that's beside the point. Was there holding? I mean, it was a little handsy. I didn't think it was holding. Certainly came one snap after there was this phantom timeout that was called that looked like it was going to be another negative play for BYU. It looked to me like the officials were giving BYU every benefit of the doubt in those two snaps. And Utah eventually breaks down. But, Utah's got to do some soul searching too, Wilner. They didn't score in the second half. Yep. They had every opportunity after that snap to make a play and stop BYU. But I agree with Mark Harlan. I think that game got stolen from Utah. I thought they played better. I thought they deserved to win that game. And I don't blame him for being upset about the officiating. But, man, what theater that was. That was my first Holy War. Was that your first Holy War?
Yes, it was. And it was everything I had hoped for and more. I mean, it was after dark and then after dark with the Harlan, because that was about, 15, 20 minutes after the game ended. And then everything just went to a whole nother level.
And even when he steps into the news conference, like, people were like, is that really the AD who's stepping in there and making those comments? Like, or did somebody just step in front of the microphone? But he was hot, man. And he was all fired up, and be interesting to see kind of where this all lands, because, you had the San Jose State head coach going after the officials on the field after the win against Oregon State. Yep. He wasn't happy. He got reprimanded. You had other coaches across college football over the weekend who kind of were taking shots. It's almost like it's open season on the officials all of a sudden.
Well, it is in some ways, because the game this time of year, there's more pressure on the games. They're bigger games. I also feel like early in the season, there's so many non-conference games that result in lopsided scores that you're less likely to have a game-changing call. Now, heated conference play got all these close games, and one decision that is, kind of mind-numbing, and it can change the outlook for an entire season.
Yeah. Well, with that, I want to ask Rick Neuheisel about that as well, sort of what he sees in the officiating, and over the years, what became acceptable to say to officials, what wasn't acceptable, the protocol, what he would have felt seeing his AD jump up on the podium. So joining us now, man of the world, Rick Neuheisel. How you doing, Coach?
I'm well. It's good to see some friendly faces. What a wonderful college football season. So many kind of plot twists, some usual suspects, but a great year, as it almost always is. As I like to say, college football always delivers.
One of those plot twists, Rick, is in Utah, right? I mean, BYU is where Utah thought we'd be. Utah is where BYU thought we'd be. Did you watch the Holy War, and what did you think of the controversial calls? What did you think of Mark Harlan's response? It's
crazy. Lots to go over there. let me go back to Las Vegas, where the Big 12 media days were held, because I was there representing Sirius XM, and got a chance to talk to a number of the different coaches, and some ADs were wandering about. So it was kind of interesting to gauge the excitement of this new, formation of a league. I was in the Big 12 when it began in 1996 as the head coach at Colorado, and remembered how exciting it was for that league to be embarking on new way of doing things. And so it was very much the same. And yet in those meetings, it seemed to me that it was pretty much Utah, Oklahoma State, Arizona, and Kansas State. And as you look at it now, only Kansas State is still alive. It's incredible how many plot twists there have been in that league, Colorado being a huge one. Dion and company have delivered on the promise, which I think is a great story, but still an amazing one. You've got BYU as an undefeated team. They were picked, I think, by Vegas to win 4.5 games. Utah was going to be everybody's, and this was Kyle Whittingham's, swan song. I think he really thought he was going to win, get to the college football playoff, and then maybe get on his Harley and head towards South Dakota, right? But it just hasn't gone that way. And no better example of it than the Holy War on Saturday night in Rice-Eccles. I did not stay up. I got to be honest. I'm back here on the East Coast, and I was a little weary, so I did not stay up for the entire game. But I woke up the next morning to see the score, and then I have access to the film, so I poured through the film. And listen, give Kalani Sitake, Jake Retzloff, give everybody all their credit because they're sitting there at 9-0 and deservedly so. Okay, here's the problem. We have a conflict. And this was true when we saw Miami and Virginia Tech earlier in the year, when they inexplicably changed a call on the field without video evidence to do so. It wasn't as though common sense could tell you that Virginia Tech had actually caught that Hail Mary throw, but they had made the determination that it was a touchdown on the field, and there was nothing in the video that said you can take it off, and yet they did, which raises this alarm bell. You've got an ACC officiating group doing the game that's sending it back to ACC Michigan control. The ACC has a financial interest in having their undefeated teams stay undefeated because that gets them to the college football playoff and maximizes the chances for maybe more than just one team. And that's financially a huge deal for these conferences. Fast forward now to BYU, Utah. BYU still the undefeated team. You get a call like that, which literally, as I was watching the film, you could not see the official throw the flag. He was on the Utah bench. He wasn't being persuaded by any coach to call the flag. And yet, as Retzloff was being swarmed by what we call a bear Mike pass rush, and he never even got close to setting his feet or having a chance to throw down the field, in that line of sight, whether it's field judge or side judge, throws the flag and bails him out with a holding call that you have to really want to call that. You have to really want to. And I'm not calling anybody's integrity in question. What I'm saying is you can't have a Big 12 officiating. Now, this didn't go back to replay. You can't have Big 12 officials doing that because Big 12 officials are trying to protect the Big 12 league. It's creating a conflict. And so too does the situation in the ACC when it goes back to replay. So what we need to go forward here, and we're learning as we go in this ever-changing world of expanded playoffs, we need a one-house, all-united officiating group run by the CFP. There's plenty enough money there to handle it. And all these replays going back to a mission control, much like they do in the NFL. So you're not sitting there going, this is an ACC crew making an ACC beneficial call. This is a Big 12 crew making a Big 12 beneficial call. We can't have that. We're too good. The game's too good, and we can fix that. So hopefully in the near future, we will.
You've been calling for an independent officiating body for college football for years.
It's just a conflict. It's why attorneys can't represent two different people that are on opposite sides of it, right? Or two different defendants in the same case, because exculpatory evidence for one defendant might be hurting the other defendant. You're in a conflict. And so therein lies, we have to get that done. And I'm sure that we will. I think everybody realizes that this is a conflict. It was sad to see the athletic director at Utah, who's an old buddy of mine. He was at UCLA as an assistant, get so emotional and end up costing himself $40,000. But you can understand at the moment what was going through his head.
I kind of wondered when he did that if, he's not, Chris Hill, who's been at Utah forever.
Right.
But he ingratiates himself to his fans, and he's got his coaches back in that moment. I kind of wondered in this NIL era where you're asking a lot of your fan base if we're going to see more of the ADs kind of out front saying, hey, I'm in this with you.
It's a great point. And if he's that smart, then give him all the credit in the world. But I think this was more of a passionate plea. I mean, this just stunk. because it was such a wonderful night in Rice-Eccles, and having had the kind of run that they'd endured, the 4 in a row, to get it over with and beat your arch rival, that would have been pretty sweet. To have it taken like that was rough. But again, congratulations to BYU, Kalani, who's one of the really good guys in coaching, and the Retzloff story, the Jewish kid at the Mormon school. I mean, what's better than college football?
Yeah, I was in Salt Lake City Airport on Sunday morning. Guy walked by with a BY Jew T-shirt. That's like, man, those things. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So, Rick, I'm just curious. You think BYU, Indiana, Boise, are these teams going to be competitive if they make the playoff with, the powerhouses that we assume will be the top 5-6 seeds?
We saw Boise give everything Oregon had to handle, right? That was a 37-34 game. BYU just finds ways to win. They're always dangerous. And I would even go, and Indiana, that was their first near miss against Michigan, and they needed to go through that if they're going to be successful in games down the stretch, as we get to the college football playoff. I think they're going to be okay, just because I think everybody's vulnerable. I don't think we have a super team. Oregon's been the closest, and they played beautifully as the number 1 team. But we've seen vulnerability out of them as well in the early portion of the season. And Dylan Gabriel, for all the great things he does, and he's a coach's dream. I think he'd be the first pick if only coaches had got to pick their quarterback, just because of how efficient he is and how he gets rid of the bad play and throws it out of bounds. I think Shedeur Sanders will be the first one drafted. But I think Dylan Gabriel is a coach's dream, and even him has thrown 5 picks. So I just think this is a very vulnerable season, which means that we could have a lot of mayhem down the stretch.
You have coached a number of teams that have played into the postseason, and you're watching these guys do it now. How does the length of this season, the potential for somebody to play 16, 17 games, the depth needed, there's an art and a science to getting your team playing every week, but also sort of this season that is building for some of these contenders. What are you seeing coaches do, or how does that job, you've been in that job, how does that job change as the season goes along?
As the season has gotten longer, over the college football playoff experience, whether it was 4-team or now 12-team, everybody that I talked to, from the Urban Meyers to the Nick Sabans, have all said that the art is how to shorten practice to make sure your teams are fresh. We're all creatures of habit in the world of coaching, meaning that we want to go over all the details and make sure that we've kind of checked off every box in our head, let alone the player's head, and covered all those, the minutest of details, from red zone offense to goal line defense to 4-minute, all the different things that go on. Nick Saban took a bow last year when they hit that 4th and 31 pass, the 4th and a mill row, right? He goes, we practice that every week, right? Well, you do, because you're checking every box. It's just what we are. We're creatures of habit. And as you get further and further in the into the season, you have to force yourself into saying, we're just going to talk through those things, because you just can't stay on your legs forever. One of the things that I find interesting about this Curt Cignetti story, who's obviously coach of the year material if there ever was one, is Indiana is now 10-0. First time in Indiana history, fellas, that they've ever won 10 games. Never before in history. Gary Danielson and Brad Nessler on the CBS had Foreigner playing "Feels Like the First Time," during the broadcast. I mean, it's remarkable. But in terms of the attention to his detail, every one of those practices doesn't go past an hour 40, and there's no wasted time, no wasted motion, and it's one of the secrets to success. So everybody's going to be very, very aware of that. But in an NIL world where transferring is more the norm than the abnormality, depth is everything. So it's really, can you stay healthy? The healthy team will have the best chance to win.
Rick, how would you attack Oregon?
Oh, that's an interesting question. There was a great coach that was asked, who's going to win the championship? He said, I have no idea, but I know what they're going to look like. And Oregon looks like a championship team.
Yeah.
They've gone out, and Dan Lanning, with his experience both with Saban and with Kirby Smart, knows how to get depth on defense, knows what a great back end secondary wise looks like. And they've gone and got those pieces. You have to, it's hard to go 11 play drives against a team like that. So you're going to have an alpha receiver make some alpha plays against programs like that. And, explosive plays, 30-yard plus plays to beat an Oregon. Or you're going to have an Ashton Genty, who ran for $190 or it's been a while. So maybe 200 against the Ducks, that can keep you on the field and keep their explosive offense at bay. Those are the two ways that you can do it. And, everybody, I'm finding really kind of fascinating Josh Heupel and his formation game. It reminds me a little, and they've got this kid, Dylan Sampson, who might be the closest thing to Ashton Genty out there. This kid, they've done some kind of eye-bone things. Remember in 1990 when Colorado won the national championship? They had Darian Hagan and Bieniemy, but they had this ability to almost line up, and they called it an eye bone. It was eye formation with a wing, but the wing was literally offset between the fullback and the tailback, and then he'd motion, and he'd just go back and forth, and in so doing created a numbers advantage to one side or the other that the defense had a hard time accommodating. And they got ahead of everybody. And for a year, it was kind of, and I see a little of that in Tennessee's offense. It'll be interesting to see with Tennessee's defense if that can carry them, and if Nico Iamaleava, who comes from the West Coast, is capable of taking the next step and being good enough down the stretch.
When on Big Ten Media Day, we talked about Oregon, Ohio State, and I got to give you a fist bump. You called that. You said Autzen Stadium, Oregon. You like the Ducks. They're heading towards maybe another meeting potentially in the Big Ten championship game. Teams that get better over the course of the season or change in that second matchup. What are coaches thinking about as that potential matchup if it does materialize?
Well, they'll pore over that film and look at things that need to be corrected, things that how they were attacked, what would be the extension of that, right? We all build our offense, and if you have a reverse, then the next thing's a double reverse or the fake reverse, and all those things will have little counters to them. But at day's end, those teams were pretty well matched. I actually think it's unfortunate that that's how we're doing it. And I think we're going to have a change in college football where we will trade in conference championship games, because it's very likely, guys, that we're going to have a conference championship game in the SEC with a 2-loss team that, if they lose the conference championship game, will be out of the 12-team field because of other 2-loss teams that didn't get to the conference championship game. Well, because now they've got 2 losses. This one has 3. They had their chance and they're out. And I don't think we want that. Oregon and Ohio State, if Ohio State takes care of Indiana, won't be in that situation. But it's a game that those who were fighting not for the 12-team playoff are saying it doesn't matter, because both are going to be in. One will get the bye, but one will get a home game, and then the home game might be better than the bye. Because if you're the 5th seed and you're getting to play the 12th seed, and then the next game you're playing a conference champion, but that conference champion might have been the 10th seed. Those are the 2 seeds you're playing as the 5th. And that could end up being the best deal known to man. And so I don't think we should do that. Instead, we should borrow from the NCAA tournament, maybe the NBA, in play-in games. Those teams that are sitting there outside just barely looking in, now you take whatever were the inventory of conference championship games and give me 4 playoff games that winners in and gets to get into the tournament.
Think the SEC would be willing to give up their conference championship game?
They'd be the last to do so because of their great pride, and it fills the stadium every time. But if Texas A&M wins the goes to the Big 12 championship game as a 10-2 team, 1 loss in conference play, and gets beat by whomever is the however many tiebreakers we have to go through to get it, we have a scenario, guys, that's very likely that's going to have 7 10-2 teams in the SEC. 7 of them. And if all of a sudden one of those teams beats Texas A&M in the championship game, and A&M now has 3 losses, they could be the odd man out. Whereas otherwise, they would have, by virtue of their great win, they beat Missouri soundly. They had that great win over LSU. I mean, you're probably sitting there thinking A&M's in, and it just might not go their way by virtue of having to play in Atlanta. That will open the eyes of Sankey and others in terms of maybe this is the other way to make that kind of money back.
I want to pivot a little bit to some of the first-year coaches that are struggling, or they've had some ups and downs. Jed Fish at Washington, Brett Brennan at Arizona, Trent Bray at Oregon State, finding that he doesn't have any depth. He got killed in the portal.
Yeah.
What do you tell those fan bases? There's some angst out there.
Well, obviously, all 3 of those guys will say patience. The situation for Jed is the best because he's going to be in a conference that is laden with resources. And even though he's getting a half share for the next few years, there's enough pride in that town and in that program that they'll give him what he needs. And, I think the expectations were low there because of the kids who were moved on to the NFL, number of guys who got in the portal. He got there late. So we've seen him do magic at Arizona. We're 1-11, 5-7, 10-3, that he'll be fine. Brent Brennan's situation is a little bit more difficult, although he's still in a power conference and resources will be there. But Brent's got to prove that he can go out and put together a roster. Started out well, and it has fallen from grace, and he's got to figure out why. That one is still a little head scratching. I've got my theories. I don't want to share them publicly, but I've got my theories on what happened there. And I can't wait to talk to him. He's one of my old guys. I coached him at UCLA, so I'm pulling for him. And then in Trent Bray's situation, there's been an answer. They figured out what's going to happen in this new construct of the Pac-12. I just hope that it's enough to keep things going. Jake Dickert has done a marvelous job in this kind of in-between type of year. And it's still, I just don't know that there's an avenue to get him to the field of 12, but it's a remarkable job of coaching. And that Mateer kid's been one of my favorite stories. He's been outstanding. And Trent's got to say, hey, we can get the kind of magic here in Eugene. I still scratch my head as how terrible that situation is for those 2 programs.
Rick, what is happening at your former arch rival? Do you think, I mean, USC has lost 5 games where they have blown fourth quarter leads, right? They're 2-5 in the Big Ten.
Yeah.
You think he could get this thing turned around, Riley? You think that, or are you thinking there's a chance that they're going to make a change? How do you view the Trojans?
So let me see if I can nail this one, because I have distinct theories on this. I think when it comes down to you've got one play to call and this is it, and I think he's had a number of games where he's had kind of down to that.
Yep.
He goes to the forward pass. He is unwilling to waste that down on a run.
Yeah.
When you look at him having just taken over at Oklahoma, each of those quarterbacks, Mayfield, Murray, and Jalen Hurts, enjoyed 3,000-yard rushing seasons by Oklahoma. All of them were over 33, up like 3,300. When he went to SC and brought Caleb Williams with him, that number in Caleb's Heisman year went down to like 2,700, maybe 20, somewhere between 25 and 2,700. Last year, when it really fell from grace, it went down to 1,700. I think right now they're sitting there around 1,400. And they won't run the ball. And yet this kid, Woody Marks, who they got from Mississippi State, is averaging 5.7 yards a carry.
Yeah.
It boggles my mind. You can protect he goes and gets DeAnton Lynn, who was this bright light coordinator at UCLA, pays him twice almost what UCLA could afford to pay him. And his numbers as a defensive coordinator at SC are behind Akaika Malloy, who was one of my kids that coached for me at Washington. at UCLA, despite having taken 2 starters with him.
Yep.
UCLA's defense is better.
Yes.
It's because UCLA is not very good at running the football either. I think they're last in the Big Ten, but at least they try.
Right.
And to me, SC just won't do it. They won't commit to running the football. And when you get an immobile quarterback, which is the case with Miller Moss, Williams and Hurts and Kyler Murray could get you out of jail, right? And even Baker Mayfield has a little of that. This guy Moss doesn't, and so they have to bring in some guys to chip on those edges. Now you lose receivers, and it's just been a horrific deal in terms of how to protect your defense, how to make sure that you stay on the field, and it's cost them. And now 4-5, 3 games to go. You better beat Nebraska, and Nebraska is coming in having not been to a bowl game since 2016. And they've got this game, Wisconsin, and Iowa left. They got to win one of those 3. So this is a real coaching, where every coach in the country will want to watch this one because of the pressure on these 2 guys.
Can you maybe speak to a little bit of that? What it's like to be a coach? And we've watched guys who are very collaborative, who's as a head coach, the strength is they bring people in the room and they let good people go to work, or they listen to new ideas. How hard is that when you're in the middle of kind of a storm, to lean on the good people you've hired and trust others when you've had success doing it your way at other places?
So I coached in the Alliance of American Football. Okay. And I had never just taken the play calling myself in my coaching career. I called a bunch of it. I always maintained veto power and was integrally involved in all the play calling, but I never brought it on myself because I always felt like I had to be cognizant of game management, had to know when to use a timeout, when to, try the trick play. It had to be something that I felt, and I had to be aware rather than my head in a Denny's menu trying to figure out what's the next call, right? So I'm coaching in the Alliance, and now I've got my menu and I'm calling the plays. And my son, we're playing the Salt Lake City Stallions. And he comes running down. He goes, "Kick the field goal, Dad." And I go, "What?" And he goes, we need 2 scores. Take the field goal here. We'll get and the onside kick, it was like 4th and 15. You get to throw for it, right? In that league. And I go, "Oh, you're right." But I was so lost in the play calling that I forgot what we needed to do. And that happens. I'm at CBS, and we're on the field with Michigan and USC, and the Trojans have the ball with 4.5 minutes left, ahead by 4, and Michigan has shown no ability to throw the forward pass. They just can't throw, and it's held true the rest of the season. And they throw 2 incomplete passes on 2nd and 3rd down that stop the clock.
Yep.
And I'm looking and I'm going, the play caller is sitting there going, "This is what works." The head coach needs to be saying, or somebody that he's assigned to do that head coaching role has to be in his ear going, "We got to keep the first down isn't as valuable as the clock getting down to 2:40 left in the game." Because if we get the book down to 2:40, we have taken Michigan out of being able to run the football. We're at midfield. If we punt it down there, get it inside the 20, you pick where it is. It ended up being on the 10. But if we pin them down there with 2 minutes and 30 seconds left, they have to throw, and they can't. We're going to give ourselves the optimum chance to win the game. Instead, they kick it down there with 4 minutes left in the game, 4 minutes and change, and Khalil Mullings breaks a tackle on a 3rd down and 1 run and goes 60, and they end up losing. Those are the kind of things that the guy who's managing the game has to be in the ear of the guy who's calling the game. And if it's the same guy, it's a tough job.
It seems like the coordinator hires, and I may be wrong here, correct me if I am, are even more important now with this. The roster turnover is so immense with the portal, right? And the coach now has to deal with the NIL. It seems like the coordinator hires are even more important than they used to be. And you see what Colorado's defensive coordinator has done this year.
Robert Livingston, unbelievable job. Yep.
Unbelievable. You see issues that some coaches are having. I wonder if that's part of the problem at Arizona, right? Do you feel like that piece of the head coaching to-do list is maybe even undervalued at this point?
Well, all we have to do is look at Mike Norvell, right?
Yeah.
He went out and got DJ Uiagalelei, who he thought was going to be his next Jordan Travis. He could not have been further from the truth. Now, this is not all on DJ, but it's a piece of what didn't fit, square peg, round hole. And what's happening in this world of multiple, and I just saw the NCAA got rid of, limits on how many visits you can give.
Yeah.
Because people are coming and going all the time. It's Wizard of Oz, right? Dorothy, my people come and go so quickly around here. That's what's happening. And you better know who the heck you're bringing in, and can they play the role that you want them to play? So we had Courtney Morgan on our radio show. He's a West Coast guy, grew up in LA, played at Michigan, but then came back. As a matter of fact, he was going to work for me at UCLA in the recruiting office, and was going through some personal stuff, couldn't do it. And I said, when you can commit, you come back. He ended up getting on Jim Morris' staff after I was let go. And now he's nearly $1 million general manager for Kalen DeBoer at Alabama. And he's worth it. But now that's what you have to have personnel people that are watching, just like they do in the NFL, watching every team and putting it together. Lane Kiffin right now just had the win of his career. They beat Georgia. And the 4 defensive linemen that accounted for the sacks, only one of them was a Ole Miss guy. One came from Miami of Ohio, one came from Georgia Tech, one came from Florida, and they're worth their weight in gold. But you have to have somebody that can get them there, and then you have to intermix and create a culture that everybody understands how this is all going, and be able to make that fly. Because the harmony in the locker room is critical to the success on the field. Because if you don't have it, you basically you're opting out, which is what we're watching with Florida State right now.
Yeah.
The Oregon story makes sense to me, that they have risen kind of in this era of resources, and Phil Knight being, I see him in the press box.
He ain't getting younger, as he'll tell you.
In now, baby. But I'm curious what you make kind of some of the new players and some of the traditional schools that maybe, waning a little bit, and sort of what you make of the overall ecosystem. Because I look at Oregon and I go, if I'm Dan Lanning, I don't leave that job unless the Kansas City Chiefs are calling me or something.
Exactly. There are great jobs out there. I don't see this as sustainable for the good of college football. This just, basically a la carte college football, where you just go and you take your shopping cart and you just start throwing things in that you can afford. I think fans are going to get put off by it because we keep going back to them to pay for everything. The universities are all looking at this house settlement and going, how are we going to take on 20 more extra $1 million into our budgets to pay our players? Well, we got to go back to Johnny and, a Ginger Booster and say, you guys got to help. And I think especially when you have an off season, imagine the folks at Oklahoma, imagine the folks in Tallahassee, that are sitting there going, wait a minute, you're not coming back and asking for more money from me. What did you just do with it? And by the way, what are you making? What are you giving? Right? It's the head coach, who I think it would be $70 million to let Mike Norvell walk out, as we already saw that with Jimbo Fisher, right? So I think we've got to get to the fact and the realization that collective bargaining has to be part of this, and that once we do that, then we can get some arms around the mobility. Not that they would lose their chance to leave. We can always have the rule which you can leave anytime you want, but you're going to sit a year. And then have provisions that allow you to leave and play immediately. But I think we've got to get closer to that so that more teams feel like they have a chance to put together these rosters. Now, it isn't just about the great players, though. It's about great teams. And that's what's beautiful about BYU. beautiful about Indiana, who brought 13 guys from James Madison with him to create the culture that Curt Cignetti wanted to be dealt. And Curt Cignetti has an eye for that diamond in the rough, the Curtis Rourkes of the world, who was an Ohio Bobcat, but 2 years ago had 25 touchdowns and 4 interceptions. So he saw a guy that knew how to get it out of his hand, not take too many sacks, throw it accurately, and play within a system. And he's having great success. But that's what makes college football so well. There's so many different ways to do it.
But to collectively bargain, right? The players have got to have a union.
Yeah. And I don't know that
it'll be okay with that.
I've heard different takes on whether or not it has to be a union or it can be an organization or something like that. But at some point, we've got to have a way for the students to get their piece of the pie, which is absolutely necessary and right, but to do so with a few more ground rules so that the fans who support this game so wonderfully have some feeling like it isn't just so haphazard.
Rick, crystal ball, where's Deion Sanders coaching next season?
Oh, I just saw that Rex Ryan wants him to be in Dallas. You know what? It's not a far-fetched idea. And Rex would be the defensive coordinator. It's self-serving by Rex to say it, but he's exceeded everybody's belief in what could happen. I didn't put it past that it would happen. I didn't know that it could happen in 2 years. And I would not be shocked for Jerry, who probably is going to have to make a change, that he would consider it, because it's so down Jerry's, purview of way in doing things. And I'm just saying it. I wouldn't be shocked to see it happen.
I'm excited to see who wins this thing, what the playoffs like. Can Oregon see this through? I mean, there's a lot of stuff.
They're my pick. I stand by my pick.
Okay,
I took Dylan Gabriel to win the Heisman, and I took Oregon to win it.
What are you interested to see or learn maybe in the next month as you watch it unfold?
Oh, goodness. Great question. I'm really excited about December 20th and 21st. That's the first round. There'll be 4 teams that are sitting on the sideline watching the action, getting ready for the Rose Bowl, the Peach Bowl, the Sugar Bowl, and which is the 4th one? Fiesta Bowl. Those are the 4 that are the quarterfinals. But those home venues for playoff games in December, I think, are going to be off the charts. And games that hopefully are a little bit outside the norm that we haven't seen put together, right? It's like you have seen those things like if Nixon and name a celebrity had a baby, this is what it would look like. This is kind of like what we could see. So like if Penn State is all of a sudden playing Boise State, that would be fabulous football to see that game, or put your game. Ole Miss is hosting a playoff game, and here comes pick it. Here comes Indiana into the Grove. What a fabulous game that we're getting a chance to watch. That's what I'm looking forward to, and I think if I'm right, that we're going to say after the conclusion of those 4 games, why haven't we been doing this forever? Right? What kept us from getting to this level of excitement? And if we have to give some of the games where we certainly know the outcome before they start, we have to give some of those up so that the players are fresh, then we need to be mindful to do that. The problem is once you're making money, it's hard to give it back, which is why these conference championship games are hard to give back, even though I think we're going to see some carnage in them, and maybe people will realize you can trade those out for these play-in games and you'll have more of what you're so excited about having watched the 20th and the 21st.
The honest answer is I could talk to you for 3 hours here about college football. And
it's a great game, isn't it?
It is a great game. I come for the football talk, and I get the Dorothy references, the Nixon references. I mean, every time we have you on, it is just fabulous. We can't thank you enough. Don't want to keep you 2 more hours. You probably got 15,000 things to do more important than you
guys are great for the game. I've always admired the journalists in the world. I know it's not always an easy job, and coaches can be curmudgeonly and, unwilling to talk and, get mad about having to deal with issues that unfortunately are part of their job. But I just love that there's more folks out there that love the game and that want to protect the game. And, given all the issues that are out there right now, the Big Ten and the SEC, they're trying to hoard the game. Yep. And I wish that we would go to the marketplaces, that we would create something closer to the NFL. I don't want to be NFL football, but I want to take what they've done so beautifully and then share those resources as evenly as is possible, so that everybody can make money. Everybody can be, enjoying, and then we get the best of it all. And all the fan bases can sit there and go, you know what? We've got access. That's my dream.
Well, we thank you a ton for joining us. Always incredible learning experience for me and super entertaining for everyone.
Yeah. Thank you, Coach. Appreciate you.
Always enjoy it, boys. See you now.
Good, Rick. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Coach.
Take care.
Wow, what a great conversation with Rick Neuheisel. Just rich, deep. It's everything that we wanted this podcast, videocast to be when we said, hey, let's bring on some of these guests that we talked to.
Yep.
Just a wealth of information. Look, if you're watching this, make sure you hit the subscribe button on YouTube and subscribe to this videocast. If you're listening on the podcast on Apple or SoundCloud or wherever you get a podcast, subscribe, share with friends, post to social media. I'm John Canzano. You can read me at johncanzano.com. He's Jon Wilner. Find him at wilnerhotline.com.
Thanks very much, everybody.